This is Dale Sunderman, Family Advocacy Outreach Manager for the DoD and Air Force and Offutt Air Force Base. Dale's resume includes 6 years as an officer in the United States Air Force, where the Sword of Excellence program he developed and facilitated was nominated as a U.S. Air Force best practice. His passionate commitment to human development, capital development, has been shaped by his experience as a high school teacher and coach, a licensed mental health professional, and father of 4 boys. He earned his bachelor's degree in psychology, history, and political science from Jamestown College in 1993, and his master's in clinical social work from University of Missouri in 1996, and also a master's in human capital management at W University. So the program title for this is Beyond Resiliency. So with that, Mr. Sunderman, the floor is yours, sir.
Excellent. Excellent. Good morning.
Morning.
All right. Excited to be here. We've been doing this resiliency thing here in the Air Force for about 6 years. And one of the first programs under my umbrella, we were in the mental health. We were informed that this was going to be happening and was tasked and asked to do a briefing for our own squadron, the medical group. So I kind of prepped it, put it together, and that morning I was taking my son, Riley, my youngest son, Riley, and he was 12 at the time, taking him to school, and just kind of as I was talking out loud to myself, he goes, "Dad, what are you talking about?" I said, "Well, I'm talking about resilience." I said, "I'm going to be going to the base." I said, "That first thing this morning, I'm going to be doing a commander's call talking about resilience." I said, "Do you know what that means?" He goes, "Oh yeah." He goes, "That's like on Stan Lee's Superhumans." He must have seen me kind of roll my eyes because he grabbed my arm and said, "No, stick with me, Dad." He's like, "You know, it's like this guy, he was handling snakes, and he got bit, and it was his job, and the snake bite almost killed him. And so he was laying in the hospital, and he came back, and everybody told him to quit his job. He needed to do something else. But instead of quitting his job, because another snake bite would kill him, he started to like inject himself with like little doses of snake venom. And over time, it's like the snake venom, it was crazy, Dad. He'd put so much snake venom in his veins that it would like kill a normal human being, and he wouldn't even get sick anymore." He must have seen my reaction because my jaw dropped. He must have known by that reaction that he was onto something. He goes, "Dad, that's resilience." You see, my 12-year-old Riley, at the time when he was 12, understood resilience to be what we now reference as the inoculation definition of resilience. Now, the Air Force definition has been to bounce back, right? But bounce back from what? So we got all these programs that are designed to bounce back, but what if we don't have any place to bounce back from? What if we're already doing pretty well? See, General Grimsley, who was the 2-star general over at STRATCOM, and initiated the current STRATCOM resilience program, was fond of saying it takes steel to sharpen steel. And Riley's inoculation definition of resilience is much more close to General Grimsley's than it is to the Air Force. Now, over the last 6 years, I've seen our airmen get very, very cynical with our resilience briefings. In fact, when many of you saw that was what was on your sheet first thing this morning, you probably did the first thing I did when Riley started talking about snake bites. You started to roll your eyes, right? Another resilience brief. And here's why I think we've become so cynical. You see, it starts, the current present process of resilience in which we're engaged in came from clinical psychology. And since World War I, clinical psychology has been studying deficits and what's wrong with people. You see, the Institute of Mental Health focuses on what's wrong, mental disease. And since World War II, we've been focusing on what's wrong with individuals. And that's not a bad thing. We had a bunch of people coming back from what we then called shell shock. Why was it that some were affected, others weren't? How do we get them back to functioning as well as possible? But that's how psychology makes its money. So in my early years as a clinician, especially in the civilian sector, if you'd come to me and say, "Hey Dale, I got a problem," and I would follow the medical model. I'd give you an assessment, then I'd give you a diagnosis, and very quickly we'd understand you don't just have one problem, you got 5 problems. Some of you are looking like you know him. Okay, so you got 5 problems, but don't worry, I'll get you to normal before your insurance runs out. Okay? That's my profit model. So that's how we would operate. And we have a lot of good theories and processes to take somebody who's dysfunctional or not functioning optimally or not functioning well and get them back up so that they don't have problems anymore. The problem with that is just because you don't have problems doesn't mean you feel good. Doesn't mean you feel great. Doesn't mean you're performing good or you're performing great. It just means you don't have problems. And I think that's where some of the cynicism comes in. Now, Martin Seligman in '99 started to challenge the psychological community when he said, we need to start to apply the science of psychology to performance, brilliance. What makes genius genius? Is it something that is lightning out of the sky and happens to a select few? Or can we study it and find some things that it's not as extraordinary as we previously thought, and it might be in the reach of everybody? The interesting thing is there's not a lot of profit in that. So the psychological community has been slow to follow in the positive psychology process, right? So we continue to still focus largely on what's wrong because, again, that's where the money is made. Even as a psychologist and as an amateur person, as a person working in the clinical arena, I needed to pay my bills, put a roof over my head, and feed my kids. So it wasn't surprising that in 2009, when General Casey approached Martin Seligman, known as the father of positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, and he said, hey, we need to do something about our soldiers. They're coming back, they're having problems, they're struggling with life, the home life, coming back and reassuming their relationships with their coworkers. Said, all right, we'll create a program. Only given a few months, they created a program that the Army went and used called the Comprehensive Soldier Fitness Program, or it's part of that Comprehensive Soldier Fitness Program. And it was founded off a program the University of Pennsylvania already had called the Penn Resiliency Program. All right? So the foundations that they built, the Comprehensive Soldier Fitness Program, of which the Air Force, in our wisdom, which we often do, said, hey, this is pretty good stuff. Let's pirate it, get another contractor, rename it, repackage, and kick it out as something else. Right? Pretty much the same thing. The fact is, though, it all sits on the foundation of the Penn Resiliency Program that was designed to address adolescent depression. People that are in a funk to bounce back up. But we got a large population in the Air Force that isn't in a funk. And so what we've done in the rollout of it, by the way, the material is really quite good. You know, you send your RTAs to it and they learn some good material, they got some good information, good skills, and it is valuable. But it's not, that's the foundation that it's built upon. And then when we roll it out, when you have a CAF day or you have a CAF training, what do? You put this little product, this little 30-minute or 50-minute segment that actually helps to develop people so that if they're in a funk, they bounce back out. And then you attach it to a safety briefing, right? Or we attach it to suicide prevention. Because, of course, that's now what most all of our airmen equate resilience with. It's just a repackaging of suicide prevention, safety courses, and it doesn't have a lot of impact on me. What we've done is we've taken it and we call it prevention. This thing called resilience, we've called it we place it in this package of prevention, we roll it out, and it's basically old wine in new bottles. Now, why am I sharing this with you? You're thinking, oh, damn. Well, it probably also verifies some of what you've been seeing. I'm seeing a lot of nods in here. Well, that's why we're going beyond resilience. We actually are taking more of the process of the intent from General Grimsley and what my 12-year-old understood, that resilience wasn't prevention. If he thought it was prevention, he'd have said the guy shouldn't handle snakes anymore, and if he does, he should wear armor. Right? But my 12-year-old understood resilience wasn't prevention. He understood resilience was something more, and that's what we've got coming out of the mental health area right now. For this CAF 2.0, it goes beyond resilience or beyond the previous packaging of resilience. The objective is to increase the resilience of our airmen by increasing those human factors, the human factors that we know most responsible for moving past coping through resilience and towards thriving. Towards thriving. Because here is what I found out when I was doing my doctoral work in human capital management. all right, I realized I was being lied to. The little history I shared with you, I didn't even fully understand that, and I was in the mental health profession. When I started looking at growth and distress and dysfunction, I come to recognize this fact that will come up as soon as the clicker works. Next one. Or I manually handle it. Ann Matson. She's the foremost authority in child resilience. And this is what she's been saying for over a decade. The great surprise of resilience research is the ordinariness of the phenomenon. Folks, as human beings, we're actually wired to be resilient, to bounce back. At the same conference in which I had a breakout session and actually got to observe and listen to Ann Matson talk to share her research, there was a Navy commander that shared these numbers with us. And it shook me and led me to change the direction of my study. Taking a look at a Hanoi population, 581 represents the POWs that they observed in this particular study. Of the 581, 80% returned to active duty status. Now, if what we were led to believe by looking at what's wrong, you'd think all these POWs were going to be suffering from a condition known as what? PTSD. You all know about that. But in reality, most of them experienced what is known as post-traumatic growth. In fact, growth is the most likely outcome for the human condition when faced with a trauma, not dysfunction. And yet, what do we study and what stands on the top of your mind? When I asked you, you were able to verbalize post-traumatic stress disorder. Yet, next slide, the 24, from this population, you had 24 of these POWs go on to become flag officers. Flag officers. Now let's assume that all 581 were even eligible, right? You're looking at a population of probably about anywhere from 4 to 5%, and maybe as high as 6%, but I haven't dug in. I don't know the numbers of who's eligible, who isn't. But you're looking at about 5% of this POW population that remained in the Air Force that went on to become flag officers. Does anybody know what the flag officer rate is of an equivalent class either from West Point, right? The Naval Academy or the Air Force Academy? Okay? In a graduating class of comparable size, it's often less than 1%. Less than 1%. Given the best training, the best education, the best opportunities and resources, promotion opportunities, less than 1%. Yet, you've got 5% of the supposedly traumatized population. How can that be? By the way, this doesn't take into account the John McCains of the world, right? That went on to become a presidential candidate, right? Or the Lee Ellises, or other individuals who have actually started up companies and businesses and been influential in changing nonprofits that you've heard of today. And they didn't make it to that status, but they've continued to make a contribution. See, this is what Colonel Reynolds and Colonel Williamson and Chief Morris want us to start to share with the Offutt population. It's not that we should be trying so hard to prevent individuals from experiencing distress or challenge, but how do we train them to better handle it? Not just to handle it and bounce back, but how about to grow from it? What does that look like? Next slide. Well, if we start early enough, we can develop what's called psychological capital. And when you've got psychological capital, you start to see a change in the way people behave, the way they act, how they experience the world, and the action they take on the world. Now, these three individuals here, at the time this was taken, they're all sophomores at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. As freshmen, they started up a nonprofit called Put a Sock in It. Now, they recognized that socks were the most in need, yet least donated of all clothing items. So they started this up. They started collecting at the university. They now have their nonprofit status. They're in every laundry facility on the UNL campus. They're looking they're already looking and in talks to expand out to other Big Ten universities, and have already cooperated with local businesses in the Lincoln area. They started it about this time last year in March. By November, they were featured in the USA Today College Edition among entrepreneurs because they had already been able to collect and get in the hands, or on the feet, literally, of folks that needed socks to the number of 3,000. By January of this year, that number was already up to 5,000. They're being identified as an official club at the University of Nebraska so that other university students can do this, can work at this, can help to disperse these socks, and include that in their service hours. But the one I want to key in on here is one individual in particular, and that's the middle one, Taylor. You see, because in order for him to have started this, he had to get snake bit, as Riley would call it. Because at age 3 or 4, actually, from what his parents say, he had a patch on one eye because he had a lazy eye. Anybody else in here have kids who have a lazy eye? You got to put the patch on it. Maybe you've seen the patch. And kids for those of us that have children and our kids in school. His parents would talk about how sometimes he'd come home, and especially the first couple days, and the bottom part of the patch was all discolored because he got teased, and he would cry so hard that it would start to change and it would get wet and they would know it and they'd have to take it off. At age 7, his parents divorced. At age 9, he was struggling with school. They come to recognize it was because he had attention deficit disorder. Was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. At age 10, he was still struggling emotionally and with the attention deficit. He got suspended from school for fighting. Snake bit. Many of us see young people that have struggled with this early on in their lives. And we think we need to get them from down here up to where they're not dysfunctional anymore. But if you understand that these challenges actually have the ability to help them grow, it's not going to keep them in a downward trajectory, then great things can happen. You see, because he went from age 10 and being suspended to age 12 painting numbers on curbs and making a couple $100 a weekend at the age of 12, because getting a no from somebody who he'd knock on the door didn't hurt nearly as bad as having to transfer back and forth between his parents' homes and feeling somehow he was responsible for their not being together. By the age of 15, or by the age of 13, he started another business called Distix. By the age of 15, he was making bank-to-bank wire transfers between Omaha and Hong Kong, his first one being of $10,000. The internet didn't know that he was only 15 years old. By the time he's 19, he's starting this business. But this isn't the only business. He's only a second year, he's a sophomore now, or a second year student actually at the University of Nebraska, because his credits have him at a junior status. You see, he graduated from high school with 27 credits under the University of Nebraska system and a 3.7 GPA at UNO. His philosophy that he shared, that was relayed back to me, was the more I do, the more I can do. The more I take on, the more I can do later. He had a very successful high school career. He was recognized as one of the top speakers in the country as a high school student, as identified by his status in the forensic points and frequent national qualifications in different events. 11, he was awarded with the Iron Cat, where at his school to have the Iron Cat at Millard West means you have to be active and complete 11 seasons of athletic events. As a freshman, it was football, swimming, and track. As a sophomore, it was cross country, swimming, and track. That's why he had an online business. He needed his business to work at night because he was studying and working so hard and conditioning himself during the day. At the age of 18, just a few weeks out of high school, graduating from a senior in high school, he completed the Kansas Ironman, which is a 70.3-mile triathlon in which you swim 1.2 miles, bike 56 miles, and then run another 13.1. He did that in just under 6 hours. Any Steelers fans in here? All right. Well, it just happened to be the same time, roughly, that Heinz Ward completed it the year before, after he left and was doing the Got Milk campaign. He completed that very same triathlon at the same time as young Taylor did. Now, Taylor, he's on spring break this week, but what does he do with his spring break? Well, he enjoys it with his friends, goes sees his mom in Spearfish, South Dakota, does some snow skiing, and then comes back and has business meetings in the Omaha community. And his third business, well, it's not his third, it's actually his fifth business, Cellrun, is a cell app that will alert you when emergency vehicles are in your radius, and has been in talks with the Lincoln Chief of Emergency Services to try to find out how they can be a beta test. He's making the world a better place. But first, he had to get snake bit. And it changes now what we think. Can it be developed? This isn't lightning out of the sky, folks. This is actually can be developed. Next slide. And this is how we do it. Next slide. First of all, there's 4 core constructs within what we recognize as psychological capital. Psychological capital, it's unique, it's measurable. We can measure it in an individual. We can develop it. Research has shown that over the last decade. And it also has an impact on performance. I don't think we should be rolling out any resilience programs unless they also happen to improve the performance of our airmen. His experience, he found, how can we be more efficacious? Believing in one's ability. After he was snake bit enough, he recognized things can go horribly wrong, and he still made it through. So his belief now is he can do just about anything and still survive it. Right? I hope he doesn't get into motocross or something like that, right? One accident there could cause a problem. But he's pretty confident, and he's failed so much, right? And that's what led to it. The optimism. He attributed meanings to events. The snake bit events that he had experienced, he changed the way he saw them. The hope, this is having the willpower and the pathway to attain goals. He fortunately had some early mentorship and ways in which he could change the way that he looked at his circumstances, and is that going to impact the person you want to be, the things you want to get out of life. And once he started to learn how to set goals, and he started seeing some of the small goals happen, he never quit. The resilience, it's the capacity to bounce back. And it's usually the result of the other 3. And the more opportunities we have to be resilient, the more we can become resilient too. Again, it's more the inoculation theory of resilience, in which the more you take on, as Taylor would say, the more you can take on. Next slide. So, let's see this in practice. There's one technique that we can use to actually develop psychological capital. Imagine you are a football coach, NCAA football coach. In fact, you're such a good coach, your team won the national championship. Congratulations. Give yourself a round of applause. All right. Now you run into this difficulty, however. You see, your quarterback was a senior. So he's gone. You got to decide who you're going to have lead your team next year. And here are your choices. You got Tommy, who's a 4th-year junior. He's an experienced backup quarterback, respected by the team, but he's got average arm strength among conference quarterbacks, and he's got limited mobility. Your other choice is Drew. Now, he's a young phenomenon, physical specimen at 6'4", 210. He is identified as USA Today's first-team high school All-American in football. He also, by the way, happens to hold national records for home runs, runs batted in, and grand slams in the area of baseball. And he throws the heat at 93-mile-an-hour fastball. Make a decision. Who is it that you would like to start? This is the person who's going to be the face of your franchise for the next couple of years, because he's actually a 4th-year junior, so you got him for 2 more years, but you got Drew at least for 4, perhaps 5 if you redshirt him. So turn to the person next to you and discuss and explain who you'd choose and why.
Experience. Drew.
Experience.
I'm going Drew. Return on investment.
He got time.
All right. So, by show of hands, how many chose Tommy? All right. Those of you that chose Tommy, why'd you choose him?
Experience.
Experience? I heard that here too.
Are you respected by the team?
Respect by the team.
He's tested on the field.
He's tested on the field. Now, I'm going to assume the rest of you chose Drew. Why'd you guys choose Drew?
Talent.
Talent. Potential?
Return of investment.
Yeah, okay, so we're looking, you've been taking business classes, right? What's the return on investment? What's our ROI? We can see he's assessing it's higher with Drew. Now, Lloyd Carr, Michigan coach, was actually in this very situation. I believe it was in '96, a year after they shared a national title. I didn't tell you shared it, but Lloyd Carr had to share his with another university. Anybody know what that university is? Nebraska. That's right. So, Michigan's coach, Lloyd Carr, said, without question, Drew is the most talented quarterback I've ever been around. Did happen. Next slide. Because this situation did happen. You were choosing between Tom Brady and Drew Henson. Now, Tom Brady was identified as an average arm strength, limited mobility, skinny, slow, fourth-year junior. In fact, they had so little confidence in Tom Brady, the team, Lloyd Carr had so little confidence that he replaced him with a true freshman when they were behind against Syracuse. And the next year did not go much better for Tom Brady. You see, for the whole next season, Tom Brady's senior year, he had to share quarters with a sophomore. He would play the first quarter, and Drew would play the second for the first 5 or 6 games of that season. Whoever had the best quarter started the second half. By the way, how many of you are familiar with Tom Brady? Right? Okay, now I just asked that to see who's not going to raise your hands no matter what I ask. Right? We all know that because Tom Brady's arguably the best quarterback the NFL has ever seen. And yet, as a college quarterback, even when he had seniority and experience, he wasn't identified as the best quarterback by the coaching staff and definitely not by the community. You see, Drew Henson was also a Michigan native and was beloved. He was everybody's favorite son. And so there was a lot of pressure to start him in front of Tom Brady. But we know Tom Brady has since gone on to become one of the greatest quarterbacks the NFL has ever seen. And Drew Henson?
We haven't seen him.
We haven't seen him, right? If you're a Dallas Cowboys fan, you know he made a pass by through there. If you're a Lions fan, you know he swung up to Detroit for a little bit. And if you're a Yankees fan, you know he played a little bit of baseball. But he never really fully reached his potential. And there's some science behind this. Next slide. Because what we recognize is that we are often driven not by our circumstances, our situations, and our talent. That has a huge impact on the results that we get in the world, but also our mindset. And this can have a big influence in how high we can raise our psychological capital up to. What researchers, particularly Carol Dweck since the early 80s, in the early 80s she was calling it an implicit personal theory. And you either had a malleable implicit personal theory or a fixed implicit personal theory. Right? She changed it to mindsets. It's a lot more sticky. I like it much better. But if you've got an attribution as a person's judgment about the causes and events in the world, and in this case, your attribution happens instantly. You don't think about it, you don't worry about it, it automatically occurs. And for some, our instant attribution about things may be fixed. In other words, we assume personal attributes, such as our abilities, intelligence, even our personality, it's fixed. It is the way it is. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. You either have it or you don't. That's why we hear so many people talk about talent and potential. You either have it or you don't. It's a birthright. Yet for those with a growth mindset, they assume that people can change. We can change and develop our abilities, even our intelligence, and our personality, as a matter of fact. I can change my personality if I focus, and focus effort is applied. Now, while scientific research indicates you actually can't change your IQ, you either have it or you don't, what's very interesting is if you've got a growth mindset, you will engage in activities that will result in better performance as though you had a higher IQ. Because if you've got a growth mindset, you will spend more time studying. You will explore more techniques to get more out of your study time. Hence, you will get better results. And it'll appear as though you have a higher IQ. Carol Dweck points this out and believes that this might be one of the biggest contributors to what is often referred to as the curse of gifted. That gifted label that so many kids receive and then never live up to. Because they don't give it their best. Many of us are parents of kids. It's like, oh, they got so much potential, but they just won't use it. Well, if they're operating out of the fixed mindset, it can cause some problems. Next slide. Because here's what happens. If we're of a fixed mindset, by the way, the mindset is not fixed upon the global person. I might have a fixed mindset about math abilities and a growth mindset about reading or comprehension. Or the difference between a fixed mindset about strength and speed, maybe growth about speed. So it's kind of domain specific, it floats around. If we've got a fixed mindset in any particular category, our desire is very different than if we have a growth mindset. You see, when you've got a fixed mindset, your desire is to demonstrate competence. You're always looking to prove yourself, to look smart. I can't look dumb or stupid in front of other people. If you've got the growth mindset, your intent, your desire is to become competent, stretch myself, learn. You can see where the desire of these two differences, just because of where you believe ability lies, fixed or growth, changes your desire. If you've got the growth desire, your desire is to become competent, making mistakes, making errors, just part of the process. If your desire is to demonstrate competence, you will do everything you can to keep from looking like a fool. So the results that we get from these two desires is we find fixed mindset individuals will plateau early. They'll have unrealized potential, they may be defensive, judgmental, and often there's a strong correlation also in the research of the imposter phenomenon. Now this was very common in the late 70s, early 80s. I've explored it quite a bit. And the imposter phenomenon is that experience that we have once we get promoted to a level of success and I'm afraid the next challenge, I'm not going to handle it and everybody's going to see I'm a fraud. This is very common among high performers. Very common, because high performers that are really successful very early on, demonstrating success and competence, always will even cheat in the moment to demonstrate competence. Then we'll get to a position in which they're afraid the next challenge or task is going to demonstrate me for a fraud. Conversely, though, with the growth mindset, you find individuals overachieving. Why? Because they don't quit. They keep going. They accept what is present with an eye towards tomorrow. I accept that I'm not very good at this right now. I accept that the techniques and skills that I used really blew this particular test or analysis, but I can learn something different. I now know what doesn't work. Next slide. So what happens between these two? Well, you got this desire, and I'm just going to kind of go through a couple of them. When we really dig into and develop the growth mindset, we get into this in more detail. So you can see we're setbacks. Hey, I'm a failure. Individuals with a fixed mindset, we find the correlation between identifying every setback or mistake as a label of identity, whereas for growth, it's an action that occurred. I failed, and so I'm willing to take that next one. The extra effort, well, if you're of a fixed mindset, that means if I got to work really, really hard and put in extra effort, then that means I don't have talent in this area, and I'm not going to be very good, and I'm likely to look the fool. So I'll sit back and not work extra. Whereas for the growth mindset, once you're applying extra effort, they're like, all right, bring it on, because they know extra effort's actually required. You can see where the signals in these different things can mean vastly different things and have completely different results. The success of others, those in a fixed mindset, because they're always keeping score and their desire is to demonstrate competence. If somebody else is successful, they're demonstrating competence, then that means I am not. Whereas with the growth mindset, they're not offended by anybody. Theirs is to become competent. And if they see somebody else already at that level, that's somebody I can learn from. In fact, they even get excited about it. They're the ones looking for mentorship. Next slide. So these are some of the principles. The mindset helps us to develop the psychological capital. And this is what, again, Colonel Reynolds, Colonel Williamson, and Chief Morris wants us to bring to our airmen. Mental health has several programs. This is just introducing the principles to you, right? so we can incorporate this into the calf days that we have to improve that. So I'm actually going to wrap this up with a story of one of our own to demonstrate these principles. Next slide. This young lady here, her name's Rita. When I say she's one of our own, she's actually she's our dental hygienist. She's a dental hygienist up in the dental clinic. Now, Rita's been here for quite some time, but she's got a very, very interesting history. In fact, early on, she was snake bit, as Riley would call it. You see, at 19, she was pregnant. She'd gotten pregnant after dating a man just twice who was 8 years her senior. Freaked out. I mean, imagine the kind of advice you would give your sister if that were to happen to her, right? He tracked her down, convinced her that he was going to do right by her. Finally, they got married 4 days before the child was born. Now, some would say that's a recipe for disaster. But they actually lived quite happily. They had 2 more children, 3 kids in all, and lived quite happily for about 15 years. Because at age 35, her husband was diagnosed with cancer, leukemia. They had been happily married. Not just married, but happily married. She had found joy with this man that initially started off perhaps as a difficult, bad choice. Found bliss, happiness, and joy, and he dies. So at 36, she's the mother of 3 kids, 2 teenagers and a young daughter, and he didn't have life insurance. Suffering from cancer with inadequate insurance, medical insurance, no life insurance, every worldly possession they owned, they had to sell off. They had a house, 3 acres of land overlooking a golf course, all gone. A cabin, 2 boats on a lake, gone. Within 3 years, she went from having this great, grand life to living in a 3-bedroom, 4-plex unit with neighbors on both sides, 2 teenage boys and a young girl, and she had to get a job at Hy-Vee because the deli would pay insurance for individuals working full-time. She raised her kids. She was snake bit, but she continued to make the most of it, representing many of the principles that I just shared with you and many more that I have yet to share simply because we didn't have time. After her kids were grown and she felt she'd done a good job, she decided, I'm going to have a career change. So at 50, she goes back to school. Struggles mightily. She wasn't prepared for school. Snake bit again. But instead of quitting and giving up, she started getting extra assistance. Pretty soon, by the time she graduated towards the top of her class instead of dropping out, which is what almost happened. She wasn't snake bit. She got a job, actually. After some time, she found herself here at Offutt Air Force Base. Fast forward 10 years, she enjoys it here, loves it here. She's been a hygienist in this area for 10 years. She's put at age 60, she's putting air in the tire of her car when she hears tires squealing. And as she stands, she gets rammed. An F-150 truck backed into her, didn't see her there, slammed her with such force into the front of her car that it forced her and the car into the curb on the other side, doing damage to the tires on that side. It fractured her pelvis in 6 places, her femur, her wrist, and all the fatty tissue that was sitting around here was all pushed out to the sides, like this. She was rushed to the emergency room. If she hadn't have stood up, she'd be dead. Would have been crushed. In a great deal of pain. Her goal and her objective was to get back to work because she loved work. Now, what was very interesting through that process, as her bones tried to heal, she's 60 years of age, snake bit once again. She's just trying to recover enough to just walk. Family thinks it's enough to just walk, in pain every day. But she started getting better. And again, her goal was to get back to work as quickly as possible. In 9 months, she was back working part-time as a dental hygienist in the dental department. Now, there were actually professionals suggesting that when she talks about her condition, she not talk about how good she's doing? That she's got to be careful when somebody asks her what kind of day she's having, don't say you're having a good day. I know it's better than yesterday, but don't say that. You got to focus on what's wrong and the damage that has been done to your body. What professional, by the way, profession do you think was encouraging that behavior?
Legal.
Yeah, legal, that was pretty quick, right? Not too cynical, but yeah, right? Because their theory is, right, we still have to go through court. If you're feeling too good too fast, you'll have less of a case, you won't make as much money, and somehow the amount of money that you make will equate long-term happiness. Well, she was frustrated by that, and that wasn't her temperament. Sure, she was snake-bit, but she was still going to do what she could. And she did. She got back. She was working. She continues after 6 years. This had occurred 6 years ago. Actually, 5 years ago. And she now has had the fatty tissue in one leg reconstructed. And she now has the other leg that still has to be done so. And I know you'd said you were scheduled to go see her. And I know you're going to go see her. You'll see her, and she has this side bag still of the fatty tissue and everything that's on the side. And she walks, because her gait has gotten to be pretty normal, and she's so upbeat and lively, you would swear, you wouldn't believe that is actually something cosmetic or medical. You'd believe she's probably trying to smuggle in a puppy, right? Because that's her personality. It's bubbly, and she's happy, and she's a go-getter. And the whole time, she said this dozens of times to anybody that would listen to her. They'd say, well, why don't you take it easy? You know, you're pushing yourself too hard. She goes, no, I got to do what I got to do. I don't want my boys to see me broken. I don't want my boys to see me broken. Because if you were up here, you were hearing, as I explained, Riley and the young man Taylor call this woman grandma. It is her life experience that leads Riley to see resilience as simply snake bites. It is her experience that leads Taylor to see that there isn't anything he can't do if he keeps going forward. And I also call her mom. I appreciate you guys giving me your time today, and I hope that you will find a value in the materials that we have and have to offer. Thank you very much.